Welcome to the 2014 Tulsa Parkinson Conference. My name is Jim Keating, and I'm the Executive Director of the Parkinson Foundation of Oklahoma, and we are glad that you're here. We know it took special effort for you to come this morning. It's a beautiful morning. It kind of feels like fall out there finally, but we're glad that you are here. Before we get too started with this thing, we'd like for you to watch just a short 60-second video.
It can strike anyone at any time. The mission of the Parkinson Foundation of Oklahoma is to improve the quality of life for Oklahoma families, and we strive to do that every day.
No one likes to get the news that you've got Parkinson's, but at least I know what it is, and I can do something about it.
It's absolutely vital for patients with Parkinson's to remain active and enjoy a normal life. I encourage my patients to join the local support group, to exercise with the exercise group. That is very, very helpful for them.
I'm 40 years old right now. I've had Parkinson's disease for almost 2 years. I know that I'll be living with it for many years to come, and if that's 40 more years, I want it to be the most productive 40 years that it can be for myself and all the other patients with Parkinson's disease.
All right, yeah, that was good. Okay, you might as well just strap on your seat belts, because this is going to be a full morning. There's going to be lots of education, inspiration, and you're going to learn a lot. And we are glad that you decided to come today. Feel free anytime to get up and stretch, go over and get something to eat. As I said, we're so pleased that Research was able to get this food for us at a deep discount. We really appreciate them. The bathrooms are in the back. Just know that this conference is for you, all those people who are dealing with Parkinson's disease every day, and we want you to get the most out of it. So there will be some things regarding speech and treatments and physical therapy and information on local resources and ways that you can get involved that we will discuss as we go throughout the morning. So feel free, as I said, just to get up and stretch, do what you need to do to take care of yourself, and we'll be out of here by about 12:30 or so. I'd like to thank our sponsors today, Lundbeck Pharmaceuticals, Medtronic, and the Movement Disorder Clinic of Oklahoma, Dr. Klos's office, as well as St. John. The Parkinson Foundation of Oklahoma started a little over 10 years ago in 2004. Our mission has always been to improve the quality of life for families who are dealing with Parkinson's disease. We are really excited because we just opened our Tulsa office at the 1st of August. And we're really excited about that. We're excited for most of you who are from the Tulsa area that you have a representative in Tulsa that can advocate for you and give you referrals and information. We're so excited. One of the things, in case you don't know much about the Parkinson Foundation, we do conferences like this in Oklahoma City and Tulsa on a very regular basis. We have support groups that meet throughout the Tulsa area as well as Bartlesville, Stillwater, McAllister, and other areas around eastern Oklahoma, as well as the whole state. So we do what we can to help you. That's our mission, is to help improve the quality of your life. Now I need to find out how you learned about this particular conference, because this helps us in marketing future conferences. So just by raising your hands, who found out about this from the Parkinson Foundation, from a letter that you received from our office? Many of you. What about from our website? From the website, a few. What about a flyer that you received from Dr. Klos's office or any other doctor's office? Others? Okay. And then who found out about this from the ad that we put in the Tulsa World? So newspaper advertising works for deals like this. So we're glad that you're here. I would encourage you, if you are not on our mailing list, to take that sheet that's got the boxes in it, on each table, and please write down your name and address and phone number and email address so that we can capture that, because we send out newsletters. We have a lot of things going on with the support groups we have in this area, as well as everything else. We would like to be able to have your contact information. One of the things that we do every week is we put out an e-newsletter with pertinent information regarding Parkinson's disease, whether it's research or treatments or exercise or whatever it may be. So if you want on that email list, please include your email on there if you have email. So please include that so we can maintain that kind of a contact with you. So that's how we can keep better in touch with you, and that's how you can find out what we have going on. The note cards that you see, the little index cards that you see on your table, if you have a question that comes up with any of the speakers that just comes to your mind, please write that question down. We won't be able to take verbal questions from the audience because there'll be so many. But if you'll just write that down, and then volunteers, when we get toward the end of the conference later on this morning, we will gather those note cards and then we'll give them to the panel, and then they can answer your questions and similar questions at the end of the session. So just write down your questions and then hold on to them, and then we'll gather at a break. We will have a couple of breaks. We'll have a short break, and then we'll have a longer break, so you can be sure to visit all of our vendors who are here who have given of their time to give valuable information to you. So I would encourage you as we go through this to visit all the different booths that we have. As I said, in August we opened our Tulsa office, and we brought in a young man who had actually interned with the Parkinson Foundation in Oklahoma City as a college student. Matt was working on his master's degree in social work, so he interned with us all this past school year, and then when he graduated with his master's degree in social work, he went to work full-time for us. And then when we had the opportunity to open the office in Tulsa, then Matt was the one to do that. He agreed to come up to Tulsa, and we're excited to have him here. He is someone who you need to know. He's a bright young man, and he has a servant's heart, and I think that means a lot to people in this realm. So today, I'd like for you to this is really kind of our launch time for the Tulsa office, and I'd like for Matt Morton to come say a few words, and then we'll get on with the program. Welcome, Matt.
Like Jim said, I'm Matt Morton. I'm the Eastern Oklahoma Director here in Tulsa, and I'm really excited to be up here and just help serve this community. When Jim talked to me about working for the Parkinson Foundation, it really kind of clicked with me, and I knew it was something special. My great-grandmother had Parkinson's disease, and when I was a kid, all I remember is seeing her in a nursing home, but I've grown to know there's so much more to living with Parkinson's disease, and each and every one of you that I meet inspires me every day to come to work. So I'm really excited to be here and to be in Tulsa. Our new office, like Jim said, we've been here since August 1st. It's over off of 71st between Riverside and Lewis. So if you're in the area, please stop by. I'd love to get to know each and every one of you. We have some very exciting events coming up here in the Tulsa area. In February, we're going to bring our Parkinson's 101 class, which it's an introduction to understanding and living with Parkinson's disease. We're going to bring that here to Tulsa. So if you sign up for our mailing list, we'll get you some information on that. And we also have our Parkinson's Walk in the Park, which we've put on for several years in Oklahoma City, but we're really excited to bring that up here to Tulsa. And it'll be a 5K run and a fun 1 mile fun run and walk. So there's some more information on that over at the booth, but we really hope that you guys can get involved with our mailing lists and our support groups and our speech programs, which you'll hear about soon. So if you see me after the event, come up, shake my hand. I hope to meet each and every one of you all. So enough about me. Our first speakers today are going to be Dana Chance and Rachel Jamerson with the St. John Medical Center. So Rachel and Dana.
I may make this break. I know, I'm not that tall.
Not quite as tall.
I'm trying.
How's that?
Perfect. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'm on the CD. Hey, cut it out over here. Well, welcome. Thank you guys for coming out on this brisk morning. It was definitely chilly and I was not prepared for this. I want to give a great big thank you to Matt and to Jim. You guys do so much for us at St. John for the programs, and I cannot say thank you enough. Well, I am Rachel Jamerson. I'm one of this outpatient speech therapists at St. John. Hannah Bernstein, back there at our table, is my counterpart in crime with the Speak Out program. And Dana Chance, she'll talk to you in just a few minutes about the PT side of everything. We started the program back in February of 2013, and we have been going strong since. Right now, I would like for anybody who's completed the Speak Out program to raise your hand. Raise them. I see my people. I see you all. Raise your hands. Okay? I'm going to give you guys a round of applause. They work very, very hard, and this is an amazing program. And they can tell you all about it if you guys have questions too, okay? All right. 9 out of 10 people with Parkinson's are at risk for developing a weak voice that is difficult to hear and understand. A weak voice can also lead to difficulty swallowing. The onset of a voice disorder in Parkinson's can be so gradual that many of you will not see the changes. Your family are the ones who see the changes, and you're kind of resistant to it a little bit, okay? No, I'm fine. Well, I want you guys to come and see us, okay? We will show you the difference. All right, and treatment is key to start early, so come and see us now. Even if you're going, I'm okay, I'm not having many problems, start it now. Let's get a jump start on it so that way we're not gonna see many changes with our voice, okay? I have a quick video that talks about the Speak Out program and some pre and post videos. And that last statement is so true. You guys deserve to be heard. I want you guys to bring out your nice, beautiful, wonderful voices, okay? I'm gonna ask you guys a few questions. So if you answer yes to these questions, guess what? I want you to come and see us for this program, all right? Do people ask you to repeat? Do you hear, does your voice sound hoarse, scratchy, or breathy? Okay? Does your family ask you to speak, that you speak too softly? Do they say, speak up, I can't hear you, huh? What? Okay? Does your voice sound strong on some days and weak on others? Do you cough when you eat or drink? Now, if you answered yes to any of these questions, or your family answers yes to any of these questions, I want you guys to come and see us, okay? The Speak Out program, a little bit about it. You meet one-on-one with a speech therapist for 12 sessions, okay? We go through a workbook and you have daily exercises that help strengthen your voice and your swallowing muscles, okay? After completion of the 12 sessions, you graduate to what we call the loud crowd. Now this is the fun time, okay? We meet once a week and we're here to encourage, support, and the most important thing, keep you guys honest and true to keeping your loud voice. We have a great time. We have parties, we have cupcakes, we have all kinds of things, but we work on our voice every week, okay? I hear some of my guys down there. They said they were gonna throw eggs at me today. Isn't that really sweet of them? Anyway, but we have done so much good. These voices sound wonderful in our groups. And yes, I keep on you guys about being very loud. And I get the comment, I feel like I'm yelling. Well, guess what? You're not. Your voice sounds wonderful at that volume. And you will feel like you're yelling a lot of the time. But I make the promise to you guys, I'm not gonna let you be the person walking around town yelling at everybody, okay? You have a very strong and wonderful voice after completing the program, okay? And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to come back and talk to us after. And now I'm gonna introduce to you Dana Chance. Oh, that is true, thank you. Okay, So my group wants to do this. So everybody who's been through Speak Out, we're gonna do the May, Me, My, Mo, Moo exercise, okay? And Oklahoma City. Yep, I wanna hear you guys nice and loud. I'm gonna stand back from the microphone, so here we go. May, me, my, mo, moo. Let's do it one more time. May, me, my, mo, moo. Very good.
My name is Dana Chance, and I'm a physical therapist at St. John's. I work with Rachel in the same department, and the Speak Out program has become such a blessing to our department and to you guys that we've gotten larger, and now we're adding a physical therapy component to it. And our physical therapy component is called Power Moves, and it's a woman named Becky Farley started that LSVT BIG. Have you guys heard of BIG movements? This woman has been researching Parkinson's for 30 years, and she's started this program that shows all the evidence and the specific kind of exercises that are specifically good for Parkinson's. The biggest question is, does exercise impact Parkinson's disease? And it does. And it's just like Rachel was talking about with the Speak Out. You may not understand or you may not realize it yourself, but your family has seen it. You've been taking smaller steps or walking slower or becoming stiff. And exercise can reduce your stiffness, improve your strength, improve your mobility, your posture, your balance, your gait speed, reduce depression, and be neuroprotective, meaning keeping the Parkinson symptoms from getting worse. And the power moves that we do are evidence-based. It's large amplitude movements. The Parkinson's disease wants to make you smaller, just like it wants to make your voice smaller. It wants to make your movements smaller, your steps smaller, and make your posture smaller. And so the power moves makes you bigger. Bigger movements, longer steps, more effective movement patterns. And we have the same type program going on. You will have one-on-one therapy with a physical therapist, me. I'm the only one doing it right now. And for about 12 visits, or a little more or a little less. And then we will start in a group program too. And it's an exercise group, and it's lots of fun, just like the Loud Crowd. The woman that started this, her name is Becky Farley, I said, and I have a video of her working with a client. And this isn't the group, but it'll give you a sort of an idea of what sort of movements we do. So along the same lines as Rachel said, ask your family members if they've noticed you've slowed down, or you've had trouble getting up from sit to stand, or you freeze, or you've had a fall. And if so, come see us back there at the booth. Thank you.
I've had the privilege to know Bruce McIntyre for several years. He served on our board at the Parkinson Foundation and has worked part-time at the Parkinson Foundation for a couple of years, and we've become friends. Bruce is he has a lot of background in the caregiving business. Bruce has a giver's heart. He helps take care of his family, and he takes care of a lot of people with Parkinson's disease. Bruce is an author, has written several books, and he's currently working on another book that will be published next year, specifically regarding Parkinson's and the challenge of living with Parkinson's disease in a positive way. Bruce lives to encourage and inspire as many people as possible, especially caregivers and those living with chronic conditions. He's the author of Resilient Life and Graceful Transitions. He has served as a nonprofit, church, and business leader. Bruce can often be found on dates and adventures with his family. That's just a short bio, but he's going to give a presentation on the topic of what I saw when I wasn't looking. Help me welcome Bruce McIntyre.
Serendipitous moments. Don't you love serendipitous moments? Those are moments when just great or funny or peaceful or joyful things happen. But the truth is that it is hard to live with Parkinson's. Whether you are the caregiver or a family member or you are a Parkinson's patient here today, the truth is that it is frustrating, and the frustration tends to narrow our vision. And so what I want to encourage you with over the next several minutes is the idea of broadening your vision a little bit. And I want to invite you to join me as I talk about what I saw when I wasn't looking. And since we're in a church, I'll start off with a serendipitous moment that's somewhat related. This happened in Abilene, Texas in 2001, and the church we were a part of ran a Meals on Wheels route. And on Thursdays, I was the college minister at the church, and so our Thursdays were the college ministry's day to be in charge of the Meals on Wheels route. And we met some beautiful, wonderful people on that route. I could probably tell stories all morning just about that. But there was one in particular that stood out. And so on this particular Thursday, I gathered up 2 or 3 college students, and we went out to run our Meals on Wheels route. And I was really in a hurry. And I did not have time for a new person. But that was the day we had a new person on the route. And I read the instructions. It said she was 92 years old, her name was Ruby, and she was blind. And it told about giving the food to the caregiver or the home care worker, whoever would be there. And I thought, great, I don't have time for a new person today. But we went in, and sure enough, it worked out like it was supposed to with the home care worker, and we brought the food in, and we met Ruby, and we said hello, and we're polite, and then we tried to make our exit as quickly as we could, and as we headed for the front door, this booming sound, this nice lady changed her voice, and this booming sound came from the living room, and she raised a quivering finger, and I'm telling you, her finger was as long as some of your arms. And so raising that quivering finger, she said, "Young man, come back here just a minute." Okay, so the college students and I walked back into the living room, and we stood before this 92-year-old blind lady, and she declared to us, she said, "I want to tell you something. God loves you. I love you. And there ain't nothing you can do about it." Okay, thank you. And so we received that message and we scurried on out. And I didn't really think about that very much, except that I was in graduate school at the time. And so I was, you're taught in graduate school to question everything. So I kind of thought maybe questioningly about that. And the next week, not having thought that much about it, I showed up. And that next week, and for about the next 5 months, until she disappeared from our list, and then we learned that she had passed away. For about the next 5 months, almost every week, as we began to depart, she would say, "Young people, come here just a moment." And we would proceed back into the living room, and she would give us her message. "God loves you, I love you, and there ain't nothing you can do about it." Every week. That is indelibly imprinted. There's a new neural pathway for me with that message. It's what I saw when I wasn't looking. I certainly did not expect that. And it occurred to me about 3 years after this event that of all the sages and all the wise teachers at whose feet I have sat, I may have never received a greater piece of encouragement or wisdom than I did from a blind 92-year-old lady named Ruby on the Meals on Wheels route. It was a beautiful moment of serendipity that kept repeating itself every week. Serendipity, moments of sneaky joy, have graciously occasioned my life. And you know the kind, those moments and instances of funny when you laugh so hard you accidentally blow soda out your nose. Interestingly enough, these incidents have ambushed me more often in unexpected and unforeseen moments than during joke-telling sessions in broad daylight. In much the same ways, instances of profound peace and joy have blindsided me when I wasn't even in the mood. And why does it always seem to work this way? Perhaps the notion of serendipity holds the answer, the stuff we only see from the corners of our eyes, the serendipity of life. Now, I believe really strongly in personal responsibility and choice and the well-planned life, but I also am very interested in keeping my eyes open for what I'm not looking for. So many of life's pleasures come after hard work and determination, but the serendipitous gifts of life are free, and they appear to those whose eyes are open, those not too blinded by busyness or worry. I think it was the great philosopher Baloo the bear from the Disney movie, The Jungle Book, who sang it best. The bare necessities of life, they'll come to you. No need to dig them up. More often than not, you'll trip over them. So it is that some of the greatest wisdom I've ever heard came from a blind 92-year-old lady on a Meals on Wheels route. And the funniest sight I ever beheld happened when I was momentarily lost from the trail deep in the woods. The serendipitous gifts of life are presented daily. So join me as we take a gander in the next few moments to see what we might not be looking at. This also applies to the Parkinson's world. You know, it may be that you pursued speak out therapy because your family tells you your voice volume is going down, or that your swallowing has become difficult. And as you pursue that therapy, you find new friends. The first year in Oklahoma City that we did the speak out, we were just all anxious to see if it would really work, if people were really interested. And we decided to have a Christmas party, and we thought maybe 20 people will come to the Christmas party. And as it turns out, the byproduct of the therapy was that these people had formed such great friendships and so much joy in this setting that the Christmas party had 70 or 80 people. We had to send out for more food. Or it may be that you seek a support group, and in the process of doing so, you meet one of your neighbors. Serendipity happens. Did you know today, November 1st, November nationally is Family Caregiver Month. So how many of you are caregivers? Just raise your hand. The family caregiver, and let's all applaud the family caregivers who are here today. As we get into November, some of you receive our weekly e-newsletter. If you don't, and you're leaving us your email today, we'll add you to that. If we add you to that and you don't like it, you can opt out. That's okay. But I'll be personally offended, but you can opt out. We'll make a list of the, no, just kidding. But if you'd like to receive that, every Friday, we send it with about 3 items in it, not too much. We try to make it bite-sized. But for every week during November, we'll be including tools, tips, and resources for caregivers specifically. And it may just be that through this conference and through that, you may have some serendipitous discoveries of new resources and new aids and new things that help you along your journey. It's the things we're not looking for that we see. Sometimes my fishing trips turn out like this. It was just past 5 o'clock in the morning, and I awoke and I glanced around at the lumps laying on the cots and the beds all around the fishing cabin at Spider Creek Resort near Eureka Springs. And with only slight illumination from the alarm clock, I couldn't really make out or remember which ones of us fell where. And we planned to be in the river by 5:30. To secure the best fishing holes for the day, so I eased out of bed. I was still groggy from late night conversation and the preceding drive. But on the other hand, I was somewhat brimming with enthusiasm, and I faked quiet as I clumsily gathered up my clothes and my boots and my hat and my waders, and I stepped out onto the cabin porch in my boxers, letting the door slam behind me. The brisk morning air caught a draft up one leg and down the other for some unexpected excitement. And I looked around to see if anybody else saw me jump, and there were no signs of life, except for the distant light at the Beaver Dam store and the camp kitten pouncing on grasshoppers there in the yard beside the cabin. So I was off to the White River. I trudged along awkwardly in my waders, and shortly I had secured a chilly and secluded spot from which to angle. The trees provided an arbor-like canopy early that spring, and it's almost as if the green was dropping and dripping from the trees. The water along this part of the river moved really slowly, and I was breathing deeply of the morning mist that hung right above the surface of the water. I nestled into a good position with water right up to my ribs. 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, repeat and release. Time and again I cast and I watched as the fly lighted on the surface and as it followed the current down into a little eddy where I had seen some trout cruising back and forth. I tried woolly boogers and scuds and even some unknown breed that I had seen that seemed similar to what I'd seen the fish feasting on all morning. Chipmunks were playing early morning games on the bank, and a deer watched me nonchalantly from a distance. I could sit here all morning and not catch a single fish, and that would be all right with me. As it turns out, I did sit there all morning and not catch a single fish. Of course, that probably had more to do with the fact that I was there for spiritual therapy as much as anything, and I'm sure my odds did not go up as I took a nap for about an hour on the bank. But anyway, 2 of the other guys caught their limit by 9 o'clock, which provided more than enough fish for dinner. But me, I caught what I came for. Over the course of a few days, I contributed plenty of trout to the grill. But mainly, this fishing trip gave me a good excuse to stand in the middle of the river and receive some spiritual therapy. It's what I saw when I wasn't looking. What might have been described as failure in terms of how many fish I caught, to me was a great success by the experience that I caught. You know, we can place ourselves in certain positions to be more likely for these beautiful serendipitous moments to happen. And some of you may be aware of this, for instance, about how the science of serendipity is working its way out in the business world. Wall Street Journal had an article in 2013 on this theory that is behind the design of Google and Zappos and lots of corporate campuses where thousands of people work. And they designed the campuses so that workers from different departments can work closer together using shared spaces to encourage more encounters, which likely will lead, and increasingly they can prove has led, to increased collaboration. So it's designing even the business world for greater chances of serendipity. In the same way, we can design our lives so that we have a better shot at those serendipitous moments. Because there are moments and environments and experiences that at first blush seem to only have failure in them, but when you reflect again, you find that there are some unexpected beauty and peace in those moments. And there are people like this. I suspect you've met some of them. Maybe some people like Wayne, limping and waddling his way towards me. His cheek-to-cheek smile gets to me long before his aching body arrives. Wayne was one of my heroes. Disease and life experience had sabotaged his body and his health, but he continued to expose a jumbled collection of teeth with a big Texas-sized smile. He shifted uneasily from side to side, quickly relieving the pressure from his bad knee and then relieving it from his bad big toe. And he often used a cane to balance his 300-pound frame as he hobbled around, spreading hope and joy. And though he was born and raised in rural West Texas among manly ranchers, Wayne expressed love easily. And in his later years, I never concluded a phone conversation with Wayne in which he didn't end it with, "I love you." For a man with such a poor existence, he certainly was grateful. In fact, I would say that Wayne may have been more grateful for less than any person I've ever met. With a large frame and a dark mustache, he resembled some kind of a reincarnation of a happy Ralph Cramden from the Honeymooners. But when he cracked that loose-toothed smile, goodwill surrounded him. Wayne lived on the poor side of town in an almost decent retirement home, across from the single moms with too many kids and not enough dads around apartment community. In the midst of that hellhole, Wayne lived. Not just taking up residence or merely existing, but really living. Wayne spread joy everywhere he went, and he had every reason not to. because he really genuinely took an interest in other people. He had a purpose in his life that transcended his own pain. No matter how poor, educated, or sullen, Wayne loved and encouraged indiscriminately. Faith, hope, and love just seemed to follow in his wake. And he got angry too. He got depressed as well, but he seemed to always come out again on top. And he called multiple people daily just to encourage them, inquire about their lives. He sat for a while each day at the entrance to the retirement home, intentionally placing himself there to welcome and greet people with that snaggletooth smile. And so in Wayne's presence, I found beauty in one of the least likely corners of the world. It's what I saw when I wasn't looking. And speaking of some of the most unlikely corners of the world, I was traveling back on a hike at Robbers Cave down in Wilburton, and I decided to avoid the interstates. Instead, I drove through little towns I've never been through before. And I was actually kind of on the lookout for signs of wonder and inspiration as I went along, and I would not be disappointed. As I cruised down Main Street in Wewoka, Oklahoma, I witnessed an unexpected moment of worlds colliding. Out the passenger side window of my truck, I beheld a Native American man dressed in fine cowboy attire with bolo and everything. He was sitting on the concrete next to a car vacuum canister at a car wash, holding the reins to his horse. I did not see him vacuum the horse. He was just sitting next to the vacuum canister where you would expect to see a car. And this quick snapshot really caught my attention, and we locked eyes. And so I took the next turn and came around in the back entrance to the car wash, and as I pulled in, I found him leading his horse away across the street. The moment had passed. What does this mean? I don't know. I'm not quite sure. I mean, maybe there's a lesson here about worlds and cultures colliding. Maybe it's about cowboys and Indians. Maybe it's about automobiles and horses. Maybe it's about city mice and country mice, but it is certainly what I saw when I wasn't looking. An unexpected serendipitous moment. The term serendipity was coined by the English writer Horace Walpole, and it refers to the knack of making fortunate discoveries unexpectedly, by accident or coincidence. The author Lawrence Block put it this way: serendipity, look for something, find something else, and realize that what you found is more suited to your needs than what you thought you were looking for. Of course, it's not all left up to chance, is it? In your life, in many areas, you probably found that the harder you work, the luckier you get. Scientific researchers from Berkeley readily admit the existence of this phenomenon of serendipity when doing scientific research, but they also point out ways to up your chances of experiencing serendipity, which include things like background knowledge. The more you know about something, the more likely you are to notice the other things. Or an inquisitive mind. I find that the people that gather at these Parkinson conferences tend to be very inquisitive people. It is such an honor, I've found, over the past few years just to interact with Parkinson's families in Oklahoma, because you tend to be a pretty bright, inquisitive crowd. Or creative thinking ups your chances. The right tools, good timing, all these things play a part. Or we might say more simply, the harder I work, the luckier I get. Or people seem to find what they're looking for, and sometimes what they're not looking for. For us, for PD patients and family caregivers, we may wonder how serendipitous joy and peace could ever find its way through the tremors, through the stiffness, the rhythm of taking our meds. Well, you can't force serendipitous moments, but you can position yourself to be receptive, to be ready when they happen around you. And you have a lifetime catalog of knowledge, a background knowledge. You know where you're most likely to find this kind of joy. You're most likely to find it with children, right? Or in nature, or around certain people who have the gift of goofiness. There are probably a few here. Somebody just pointed. You are inquisitive and creative. You are learning and watching. It's what you're doing here. You are observing and reflecting on life around you. And as you position yourself to receive what the day or the week may hold, good timing will happen more often than you think. And your trove of stories and reasons to be thankful will increase steadily as you continue to live with excellent peripheral vision for what you're not looking for. Your children and grandchildren have certainly provided you with this kind of joy, right? You probably all could tell 10 stories on your children or grandchildren that are just those serendipitous moments of joy. About 5 years ago, I took my kids camping. My son at the time was about 5 years old. And we got back from the camping trip, and naturally on the camping trip, I had told the kids some stories that I wouldn't tell around Mom. So we got back and we're having dinner that first night back, and my kids are egging me on to tell this story that's really not dinner appropriate. And so I'm saying, no, I don't need to tell this story, and the kids are encouraging me to tell the story, so I tell it anyway. You can tell doesn't require a lot of prompting. So as I tell the story, my wife's face is moving in inverse proportion to the excitement of the story. And my 5-year-old at the time notices this discrepancy on my wife's face. And he coined a phrase for us that has given us many moments of joy ever after. It's given us new vocabulary, and I'm going to share it with you. As he watched me tell this story and laugh and watch my wife frown, he said, wait, 5 years old. Dad, I think you dislocated Mom's happiness. I suspect you've had your happiness dislocated at some points, right? But you also have certain tools that help you relocate your happiness. And I would suggest to you that even in the mix of Parkinson's and symptoms and meds and frustration, that is real and it's warranted. That even in the mix of all of this, you can still summon your life experience. You can still summon your inquisitive and creative nature. You can still choose to assume a mental posture of receptivity, to put yourself and your mind where you're more likely to brush up against moments of joy and peace. And even when you dislocate your happiness, and it will happen, that you know that you can relocate your happiness. My wife has had an illness. It's not Parkinson's. It's dermatomyositis. She's had it for 10 years this past summer. And so for 10 years, we have dislocated and relocated our happiness many times over. I've a book back there today, if you're interested. It's called Graceful Transitions, and it's all about the unwelcome changes that come our way with chronic illness and caregiving. Because we don't welcome the changes associated really with disease, but they happen anyway. And yet, as we welcome those unexpected or those unwelcome changes, there are ways that we can transition more gracefully than we would have otherwise. If you like the tone or some of the ideas that I've shared with you today, you'll probably like the book. It's only $10 for today. And it might be a tool that helps you relocate your happiness. Well, recently, there's a couple that I met, and I told about this 1.5 years ago at the conference, but it's so good I want to share it one more time. Because on occasion, there are people that I meet with whom I am genuinely impressed, who genuinely inspire me. And this couple does this on a continual basis, but here's one snapshot from their lives. I was at a Parkinson's support group in Oklahoma, and this gentleman is living with Parkinson's disease, and his wife has continuing hip problems, so they're kind of mutual caregivers. They can really care for each other. And they don't get around as quickly as they once did. And on their 54th wedding anniversary, they brought a cake to the support group. And it wasn't leftover cake. It was like one of the cakes that didn't get used, so it was really a brand new cake. And it was a good cake. You know when you've eaten a cake that's like in a whole nother category? It was one of those cakes. And so, it was a culinary masterpiece. And so as they served their cake to each member of the group, I remember observing their smiles of deep contentment because they love to give to others. It gives them purpose that transcends hip problems and Parkinson's. And they were truly relishing in the moment to serve those fellow group members and to spread joy. And then about halfway through, a member in the group pointed out the obvious and said, "You're serving us your cake. We should be serving you your cake." And as they commented on this beautiful experience playing out before us, that couple laughed, and they caught each other's eyes with sly but still romantic looks. In attempting to deflect some of the praise, he began to talk about how slow they walk. But, he offered, we stagger along together. And she squeezed his arm and winked at him with a sparkle in her eye that looked as fresh as it was 54 years earlier. And we were all just glad to be there in that unexpected moment of beauty. It is frustrating to live with Parkinson's. It is frustrating to be a caregiver in a Parkinson's family. And it tends to narrow our vision to the things that hurt and upset us and cause us to be mad and sad. But I want to give you this moment's encouragement today and a challenge to open up the angle of your vision, to intentionally decide to get into a more receptive mode, to maybe even open yourself up to look for what you're not looking for. And you might even see something as beautiful as a blind 92-year-old lady on a Meals on Wheels route with a message for you. Keep your ears open for what you're not listening for. Keep your eyes open for what you're not looking for. And maybe you'll have stories to remember and share about what you saw when you weren't looking. Thank you.
Many of you know Dr. Kevin Klos. Dr. Klos is a native Tulsan, went to school at Trinity University in San Antonio, played a little basketball there at Trinity. Didn't you play basketball there, Dr. Klos? Just a little bit. I think maybe he's lost a little bit of that, maybe, I'm not sure. But went to medical school at OU and then studied at the Mayo Clinic. And then, fortunately, about 8 or 9 years ago, moved back to Tulsa. Tulsa is his home, and Dr. Klos is one of 4 movement disorder specialists in Oklahoma. And I'm sure those of you in Tulsa, as well as all of Oklahoma, appreciate his knowledge and his care for patients. Dr. Klos serves as our state medical advisor for the Parkinson Foundation of Oklahoma, and he has been an inspiration to a lot of people. We're always glad when Dr. Klos gives of his time, because he could be at home or possibly a soccer game, basketball game, baseball game. I don't know. Don't you have 5 kids now? 5 kids. So he's got enough for a basketball team. But he could be doing a lot of things on a Saturday morning, and we're so fortunate that Dr. Klos has agreed to share his time with you. So help me welcome Dr. Kevin Klos.
Well, good morning. Jim, I have to thank you for inviting me today, because the main job I had today after this was to rebuild part of our fence at our house. So you're taking me away from that job. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk for the rest of the day. This should be about 4 or 5 hours long, at least until it gets dark, and then we'll call it quits. But no, thank you for being here this morning. First, I want to thank all of the individuals with the Parkinson's Foundation that has helped put this on, and all of the other wonderful events that go on statewide, especially to recognize Jim Keating, and now we're so thankful to have Matt involved in the organization and so many other people here in Tulsa. So I think it's wonderful, everything that they do, and they should be recognized for that. I'd also like to thank all of the vendors back behind you today, all of the companies that are represented here for their valuable sponsorship, all of the giving that they provide for patients and families, and all the services they give us here in the state. So please, after the talk, please visit all of them and spend some time with them if you would. We really appreciate all of them here. And I'd like to just briefly thank my wife also for taking care of the children this morning, the 5 children, while I'm here getting to spend some great time with you. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time out today to travel. Many of you have come quite a distance this morning. And some of you even that live closer may have had some difficulties getting here this morning. I know just sometimes leaving the home is a challenge, and we appreciate all of you for making that effort this morning. So I'm going to try to make it worth your time this morning, and I'm going to touch on some topics that I think are very important for patients and caregivers to understand. They're not, maybe the most exciting information to share, but I think it's very important information to share. Let's go to the next slide. These, I don't know if you can see them, these are my 5 children. This was actually taken last night as they were getting ready for Halloween. Our 2 boys on the left are really always attached at the hip like they are here. They're best of friends, and our 3 girls as well. And one of the advantages of having 5 children is that there's always at least one child that is happy with you. So like for instance, last night when we asked some of the girls to not have any more candy, I wasn't the most popular person at that moment. But fortunately, there was someone who was happy with me after that. But we can go to the next slide. So this information that I'm going to talk about this morning could potentially, may not settle well with everybody here. And I want you to know that we're sharing this information out of a sincere desire to help and a sincere desire to help you cope with this very difficult illness and have the best quality of life. And so that's the focus today, even though we're going to touch on some really difficult topics to talk about. So I was asked to discuss what are the complications of Parkinson's disease? How do we live with this disease, and what should we watch out for as the disease progresses? A lot of patients come to the office and their first question to me is often, well, what's the prognosis? Is Parkinson's going to kill me? And I have to tell them that it could. It could, but so could high blood pressure. So could diabetes. So it just depends on how we treat it. And if we treat it aggressively, and if we attend to all of the potential complications, Parkinson's does not have to kill us. We can live a normal life expectancy, but unfortunately we're going to live with this disease as it progresses. We don't have a cure yet, but we're working on that, of course. So the number one complication, according to the medical literature, is this risk of aspiration. So if we look at a large population of patients and follow them, we find out that about 40 to 50% of patients will start to develop swallowing difficulties. And the complication of a swallowing difficulty could be something called aspiration, and this happens to around 40 to 50% of patients at some point during the illness, if not treated or caught and prevented appropriately. And if you aspirate food or liquid into the lungs, you can develop a pneumonia. And this is the number one complication of Parkinson's. And this picture just depicts someone who has swallowed an aspirate of some sort, and it's in the lungs, and now we have an infection and fluid building up inside the lungs. Let's go to the next slide, please. And I hope you guys can see these, but I want to just touch real briefly on swallow function. You might think swallowing is not that complicated. It probably shouldn't deserve a lot of time this morning, but it's actually quite complicated how the brain coordinates the whole process of chewing and swallowing our food. And there's 3 phases of this that happen, and there's a lot of muscles involved. But the story is not just about muscles, the story is also about the sensory nerves that are located in the back of the throat. So these sensory nerves have to appreciate that the swallow mechanism needs to take place. It has to read that something is coming its direction, and we need to make all the appropriate changes so that the food goes down correctly and not into the lungs. And so the sensory nerves that go to this part of the anatomy unfortunately develop the Parkinson's disease pathology. So it actually involves nerve injury in this location of the body, not just in the brain itself. And so the sensory nerves are not picking up the signal so well and not triggering this reflex of swallowing and blocking the airway so that we can get the food and liquid down correctly and not into the lungs. Let's go to the next slide. So if we take an x-ray of this, if we give a patient something to eat or swallow liquid, and we put barium in there, a way to look at the bolus here on an x-ray film, we can tell if it's all going down the proper direction and into the esophagus like it's supposed to, versus in this picture, the arrows are pointing, if you can see it, the arrows are pointing at some of the liquid actually going the wrong direction and actually entering into the trachea and then down into the lungs. And normally, if we have good reflexes, we would cough. We would expel that liquid back up and clear it out of the lung field. But unfortunately, in Parkinson's, those reflexes may not be there, and therefore, you may not cough. You may not have a choking response to the liquid going down the wrong direction. And that sometimes is called silent aspiration. And that's a very difficult problem. So if we're not sure if aspiration is taking place, even on a small amount, we can do a study like this to see if it's happening. It's a good way to screen for this type of problem. And later on, I'm going to talk about how this should be incorporated in our management every year. What are the proper testing that should be done to monitor for some of these complications? Now, we talk about ways to treat this complication, and first I think it's important to touch on maybe how we can prevent this from getting out of hand. So a great way to do this is to exercise these muscles. So you've heard this morning about how important muscles are and how important we need to do our exercises and therapy to keep our muscles strong. But I think as I've talked to patients over the years, I think there's been a general hesitancy to really take this muscle group seriously. You know, I think most patients are thinking more of their arm and leg muscles and other muscles of the body, and maybe not so serious about the swallow muscles or the speech muscles. And sometimes we get into little battles in the office. I really want you to go to speech therapy or swallow therapy, and the response is, no, I'm not interested in that right now. But I would encourage you to rethink that, because the more we exercise this part of the anatomy, the better we have a chance of avoiding some of those complications down the road. And so the speech pathologists who are here and do a wonderful job statewide can work on those muscles. They can give you the direction that you need to work on the appropriate exercises at home. Also, as they do the therapy, they are not just working on what you might think are speech muscles, but they're working on the swallow muscles as well. So it's an overlap that is very important. Let's go to the next slide. Another instrument that has been helpful, and I put this in your handout today, there's a breathing device. This is just an example of one of them called the EMST 150. And what's interesting about this is, and they did a study in Parkinson's patients on this type of therapy. This device involves a patient doing exercises where they take a deep breath in and they blow the air into this contraption that kind of looks like an asthma inhaler. You can set the resistance on the device so that you're blowing out into different pressures. So it's like doing bench presses for the breathing and swallowing muscles. You're exercising those muscles as you try to breathe into this device. And you do sets, repetitions, you do certain number of these exercises each week, and they followed patients over months and found dramatic improvements in swallow function doing these exercises. And a lot of our speech pathologists are now incorporating this type of therapy in their program and encouraging patients to use this. If you want to order this, it's available actually online. There's a website that I think I put in your handout. I believe they charge $49 for this device, and it may be worth the money. Let's go to the next slide. The speech pathologists have some other tools to use. This is something called eStim. It's a device that they can attach to the outside of your neck, and they can deliver just very low electrical stimulation to the muscles of the throat and strengthen those muscles and try to regain the coordination of the muscles to help with your swallowing as well. And so many of you have tried this and have found some results. It doesn't work for everybody, but it may be worth considering. And then there's also something called thermal stim, where we can use instruments that have a temperature, for instance, a cold temperature that is applied to the back of the throat to stimulate. Remember, I mentioned those nerves that are not picking up the stimulation of us wanting to swallow. And so we can try to regain some of that sensory input by stimulating the back of the throat. So that's another tool that the speech pathologist would use. Please don't buy this and just try to do this on your own. It needs to be done by someone who knows what they're doing. Let me just touch too on what if we already have swallowing problems? What if we're dealing with choking and coughing and we're trying to make it work? And I think the first thing to keep in mind is that we can also utilize some techniques, and I put some of those on your handout, some little tricks that the speech pathologists have taught us, ways to position the body, for instance, tucking the chin when you take a swallow, some exercises that can be done to strengthen the tongue and the lips, the back of the throat muscles. They have good recommendations, I think, on modifying diet. Sometimes we have to soften the foods or avoid certain foods that may be difficult to swallow. Some patients will start getting in a hurry and wanting to eat more food at a time because they feel like they're eating slowly as it is with Parkinson's, and so they want to keep up with everybody else at the table, so they might have a tendency to take in larger bites or larger amounts of food. And of course, when you have a muscle system and a nerve system that's impaired, that's going to make it very difficult to swallow correctly. So making the amounts of food and liquids smaller helps, and sometimes even thickening the liquids. So we'll ask patients to put a thickener in their liquids, and that sometimes helps to prevent some of the aspiration as well. So sorry if I went a little excessive on that, but I think this is an important topic to discuss and to understand, because it is the #1 risk. So we need to be aware of this problem and utilize the resources that we have. Let's go to the next slide. So now there are some patients that unfortunately just cannot swallow safely anymore. So they may end up at a point where either they can swallow just a little bit of food and liquid for taste, or they just cannot safely swallow anything at all. And that's a difficult time in the illness. However, I think a lot of our patients have had the feeling that a discussion of an alternative way to deliver medications and nutrition, such as using a PEG tube, is not something that they want to consider. That this is they consider this as a very invasive procedure and an unnecessary procedure when dealing with Parkinson's. And I would argue that I think we should be careful about that opinion because it can actually be very helpful And it doesn't mean that we're at the end of life necessarily if we put a PEG tube in or recommend a PEG tube. This is an example of a PEG tube, and I think when people see what it actually looks like, you know, a very small hole that's made in the abdomen with this rubber type tubing coming out. It's easily concealed under the clothes, and it's very easy to use as far as delivering nutrition and water and all the calories that a patient needs to take in. We see a lot of patients who are just not able to take in enough calories or enough water to stay hydrated. They're having trouble taking medications, so maybe they just don't take them all. And of course, that can lead to a lot of problems. So if we have an alternative route like this, it really can make a big difference. And I think we should maybe not be so scared about this because it can be done as an outpatient procedure. There's very good doctors who can insert these tubes. They are reversible. They can be taken out if needed. And they can really help this situation. Because if we end up with an aspiration pneumonia, usually that's a situation where patients will be in the hospital. They'll need antibiotics for anywhere from a couple of weeks to sometimes 3 or 4 months, depending on how bad the infection might be in the lungs. And so if we can avoid that, if we can keep patients out of the hospital and keep them safe with their swallowing, we've achieved quite a bit with this condition. So that's sort of the first segment that I wanted to touch on with aspiration. And if you have any questions or feel like you need to have this evaluated, if you're not sure, am I having swallowing problems, you know, talk to your doctors about that, visit with our speech pathologists, and testing may be necessary to look into this further. Okay, we're going to move on to the second segment. So another major area of complication has to do with falling and weakness of muscles. And this is probably one of the most common discussions that I have in the office with patients and families. It's often the very first symptom or problem mentioned when patients come in. You know, we're having trouble walking, we're falling, I feel like I need to hold on to something. And so this is a major threat with Parkinson's disease. If you were just newly diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and you're having trouble with balance right at the beginning, if you're falling and really have seemed to have lost all sense of balance very quickly, then we really need to re-look at the diagnosis. So that maybe is a point I want to emphasize, that sometimes what may look like Parkinson's disease may not be that condition itself. And so if within the first year, if there's a lot of trouble with falling and balance and not much problem with tremor, there could be a different diagnosis at work, and we'd encourage you to have that looked into. Usually the balance and falling problem is a later problem in the disease progression. It's usually not that much of a problem in the first, let's say, 5 to 10 years, depending on how you respond to medication. But then over time, what can happen to a lot of our patients is they get dependent on just taking the medications and feeling like that's all we need to do. Just take the medications and I'm treating my Parkinson's disease. And they kind of forget about the importance of exercising the muscles. And so now that's our big emphasis in the clinic. I think most of the neurologists are really pushing this topic aggressively and trying to get all of our patients to realize that this needs to be part of the therapy. It's just as important as the medications in some cases. Let's go to the next slide. And so when balance problems develop, there can be a number of reasons for this. It may not just be that you have Parkinson's disease. It may be the medications that you're taking that have suddenly created a balance problem. It could be, of course, the lack of exercise, that your muscles are getting weaker and weaker, especially in the legs and in the core muscles, which we're going to talk about in a minute. It may be environment. It may be the home or the patient who likes to do work outside, and they're putting themselves in a very unsafe environment. a lot of uneven surfaces or tripping hazards or other problems that need to be considered when you pick the activities that you're pursuing. Vision can certainly enter into the equation. And I think one of the most common reasons that I hear patients falling, when I talk to them about the details of the fall, often the discussion is, well, I'm using the walker all the time, but I thought I could just walk over to the kitchen and grab that phone that was ringing, and I parked the walker just for a minute. And then they fell on the way to the phone. Or they thought I would be fine in the bathroom, I'm going to park the walker out in the hallway and go into the bathroom, and then they fall. So the lack of use of the assistance device that was recommended could be part of the problem as well. Another problem that develops, I think, for patients is that perhaps when they take their medication and they feel like they are on, in other words, the medication is working properly, they'll say that, gosh, my balance is pretty good during that time. I feel good. I can walk around just fine. I'm not having any trouble falling. But then there's times of the day where it changes, and all of a sudden, I'm not balancing so well. And gosh, at 3 o'clock every day, I seem to fall. And I don't know why it's happening at that time of day. Or in the morning when I first wake up before I've taken medications, I seem to have trouble with my balance. But the rest of the day is not too bad, they'll say. So the cycle of the medications, this is just a diagram showing how we take medication and we get an on response, then the medication wears off and we go into what's called an off time. And as we're waiting for the next pill to kick in, we are at risk now of our Parkinson's symptoms coming back in full force. And it can be difficulty moving our legs, the shuffling again. It could be freezing of our gait. And then it could also just be the balance impairment that comes with Parkinson's. And now we're at risk because we have about an hour or so before the next pill kicks in, but yet we're still trying to do things. We're still trying to get around the house or do something physical. And that's just not an appropriate time to do that. So I think if you're having an occasional balance problem or an occasional falling problem, if you can chart or keep a diary of how the day is going related to your medication dosing time and when you are having the most difficulty, you'll often see this pattern develop where it's happening at the dip of the medication during an off time. And that's something that we can fix quite easily. We can adjust the timing of the dosing. We can add medications that fill in the gaps that make it more level day and night. So there's some options there to help you so that you don't have those episodes of falling. Okay. Now, there are some patients that have balance problems all day long. It has nothing to do with the medications or the timing of the medications. There's just simply a balance problem from Parkinson's that's there all the time. Not everybody gets this problem. We don't understand why some have more balance problems than others. But we have learned through lots of wonderful studies that there is a therapy that can be given to patients to strengthen the muscles and work on this balance connection, work on the nerves that coordinate from the brain out to the muscles to try to improve balance. And we're excited about the Power Up program that's now here in Tulsa that's been going on in Oklahoma City because they are really addressing a lot of these challenges and helping patients with the muscle strength and with the balance. I'd also like to embarrass someone just for a moment and recognize Keith Koo, who's sitting in the back here in the very nice bright green shirt. It's no exaggeration to tell you that I think Keith is one of the best physical therapists and balance therapists in the country, and I'm not exaggerating, not just in Oklahoma, but in the country. I've been to a lot of centers around the country, and he has an expertise in Parkinson's that's quite unique and quite helpful. So if you haven't had the opportunity to work with him, and even if you're not having a lot of trouble, but just to go to him and get some ideas on what you can be doing to strengthen muscles and work on balance, he is an excellent, excellent resource here in Tulsa to consider. And we have wonderful therapists everywhere in Oklahoma to work with as well. Many of you are not familiar if the therapist or your neurologist tells you that you really should utilize a walker for gait assistance. You may not be aware that there is a special walker that has been designed for Parkinson's patients. It's called the U-Step walker. It's designed with basically a U shape of the base of this walker. There are small wheels that go around the U and make it very easy to pivot the walker and drive it into different areas of the home. It's weighted in a particular way to help Parkinson's patients so that if you start to fall backwards or if you're losing your balance, it's weighted so that it can hold you up instead of the walker going down with you, perhaps with some of the lighter ones that are available. Some of these also have attachments where a laser light can be turned on across the back of the walker, and this light will help those patients that are having freezing troubles so they can try to kick the light with their feet. It gives them a visual goal or target, and they can kick the light, and it often helps break them out of those freezing episodes as well. So you might look into this type of apparatus. It's a little bit challenging, I think, to transport. That's maybe one of the downsides of this particular walker. It's a heavier walker, but many of you are using it and have found it to be helpful and have found a way to transport it. But it certainly can be helpful at home as well. Okay, now another important piece of this falling and balance issue is we really need to make sure our bones are nice and strong and healthy so that if we do fall, we're less likely to break something. And so I'm encouraging our patients to have bone density scans performed at least once a year if you can, if it's appropriate. If you have already some osteopenia or osteoporosis in your bones, your medical doctors are probably helping you with the proper treatments of that. I did put in your handout some information about calcium and vitamin D, the amount that's recommended to take every day to keep your bones as strong as possible. But if you do have osteopenia or osteoporosis, you really should consider the medications that are available for osteoporosis that can help rebuild some of the bone itself. So talk to your medical doctors about this. This is just a diagram of the core muscles, and so we're talking about muscles that are essentially from the chest down to the knee is sort of the core of the body. And I would encourage those of you who are interested in keeping your balance as strong as possible and not falling to really consider working on this particular area of the body. And this is where our physical therapists, our trainers can really help you. At a lot of the exercise centers now, you can find a circuit that they've created of machines where you go from machine to machine and you're working just the core muscles of the body. And so core is a popular word now, I think, in the exercise centers. So if you ask a trainer, how do I work on my core, they will direct you right to where to go for that. And there's lots of great ways to do that. There's other modalities such as yoga or Tai Chi or other programs that also try to tone and strengthen the core muscles as well. So talk to your doctors about the best way for you and the safest way for you to build the core muscles. Okay, and now in the offices, we are trying to incorporate more balance testing. There's a test called the Berg balance test. This can give us an objective number. We can actually score the patient on their balance. We ask them to do exercises like, can they stand on one leg? Can they bend over and pick up something off of the floor? Can they stand with their eyes closed? And different challenges like that. We can score how they do, and that gives us an objective measure that we can follow to see if their therapy is paying off, to see if they're getting their exercises done correctly, and monitor how this balance system is working. there's a few complications to try to bring your attention to and help motivate you to want to exercise. This is one of the complications that can happen to patients who have poor balance and are not working on their muscles. Patients can fall, of course, and hit their head. And of course, this can lead to bleeding complications inside the skull, just outside of the brain, something called a subdural hematoma. And this picture shows the collection of blood there on top of the brain. And this is a CAT scan on the right showing, you can see that sort of gray shaded area on the left. That's the blood that has collected inside next to the brain, and it's pushing the brain over to the side. And this is a potentially very serious and potentially life-threatening complication that can happen. And so, again, being really careful about if you've been told to use your walker or your cane, to really do that so that you don't end up with a complication like this. Another complication that we see are fractures, bone fractures, hip fractures. One study said that about 10% of patients followed over an 8-year time period developed a hip fracture from falling. And unfortunately, sometimes this is what leads a patient from being able to live at home to ending up in a nursing facility because they've fractured their hip and it's really difficult to regain mobility. And we want to prevent this complication as well as best we can. Okay, so that's balance and falling. Now this section is also a challenge to talk about as well. It's very difficult to talk about in the office with the patients and the family members. It's a very sensitive issue. I do want to mention that if you have more questions or feel like you need another resource to read more about cognition and memory difficulties, dementia, and Parkinson's, my mentor, Dr. Eric Alskog from the Mayo Clinic, has just recently released a new book regarding dementia and Parkinson's disease. We were hoping to get him down here today, actually, to talk about this book and the material in it, but hopefully we'll get him next year. But this is a wonderful resource as well that you may consider, and I'll have this up here if anybody's interested in writing down the name. When we look at patients that are newly diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, the studies have really blossomed in the last several decades. This is a graph just showing the amount of research that was being conducted on the mental, cognitive side of Parkinson's disease. If we go back into the 1980s, you can see there was a much smaller representation of research in this area, and it has really grown over this time period. So the emphasis, I think, in the medical community, going back really to the 1950s when we had levodopa first released, was to focus on the motor problems, to focus on tremors and focus on the gait problems of Parkinson's. And now that we have some effective treatments, now the focus is moving a little bit towards the cognitive side, because patients are now living longer. Patients are, which is wonderful, and they're living almost a normal life expectancy. But as they live longer with Parkinson's disease, we run into this risk of developing a dementia. So let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about this just for a moment. We found that about 1/3 of patients who are newly diagnosed with Parkinson's disease will already have some mild cognitive difficulties. Now, this could just be a little trouble with memory. It could be trouble with visual spatial skills. It could be a little bit of trouble with decision making, what we call executive function. And at that point, it may not have any impact on how you are doing your day-to-day life. We say at this point you are functionally independent. You don't need any help with the day-to-day activities. But if there are changes that are mild in cognition and you are functionally independent, we now have a diagnosis that we may give patients called mild cognitive impairment. And this is an area of research that has really developed when we look at Alzheimer's disease. We've recognized that there's a transition point between normal aging, mild cognitive impairment, and then dementia of Alzheimer's disease. And what we're trying to do is discover those patients that are moving in that direction towards Alzheimer's disease and intervening with medications or therapies that will prevent the development of Alzheimer's disease. And there's a lot of wonderful research working on that. Now in the field of Parkinson's disease, we've realized there's a similar process that can happen from Parkinson's, where patients can move into this category called mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, and that puts them at risk of possibly developing a dementia later on. And when we look at patients that have lived 20 years with Parkinson's, the risk is about 80% that will develop a dementia. So when we talk about dementia, now we're talking about a situation where there's more generalized cognitive difficulties, and the patient has lost the functional independence. The patient is now requiring help with just the day-to-day activities, getting dressed, preparing a meal, taking medications. Maybe they can't balance the checkbook any further. They're not safe to drive. And this is a very difficult time in the disease process. And so the better we can do in the research world of finding out which patients are moving in this direction and intervene before they develop a dementia, that's going to be a great victory, I think, for Parkinson's patients. Now, we do have some technology available to help us with this. Some of you have had what's called a PET scan. This is a special type of diagnostic imaging of the brain, and it often helps us diagnose the dementia of Parkinson's disease if we're suspecting that, or if we're wondering if the patient may be developing Alzheimer's disease on top of Parkinson's disease, which does happen, unfortunately. This type of test can differentiate those scenarios often for us and help us bring everybody on the same page. There are treatments available, and in the past, I think we have generally, as neurologists, we have typically waited until patients were showing signs of dementia before we started to prescribe medications to help them with cognition. And the lesson we learned in doing that with our Alzheimer's patients is, by that point, it's much harder for these medications to work. It's almost like we waited a little too long to prescribe these medications. So we have a number of medications that fall into what's called the cholinesterase inhibitors. These are pills or patches that are available to treat one of the neurotransmitters that becomes deplete in Parkinson's, called acetylcholine. So these drugs help to raise those levels in the brain, and sometimes we see improvements in memory or executive function or other cognitive skills. More research is being done to figure out if we prescribe these medications early on, maybe right shortly after the time of diagnosis, what would happen to a patient who took one of these medications from the beginning? Could we stall or slow down this process? Could we delay a dementia by 5, 10, 15 more years, or could we maybe delay it indefinitely? And that's where the research is working on this. We do know that cognitive therapies also help patients, whether they have the mild cognitive impairment form or whether they do have a early dementia. We have therapists in Tulsa and Oklahoma City that are in the neuropsychology field, and also in our speech pathology field, that will work with patients on cognitive exercises to, again, improve those cognitive skills that are weak. The neuropsychologist can do testing, formal testing, to see where the strengths and weaknesses are. They can figure out if a patient has more trouble with memory, let's say, versus executive function, or maybe their memory's pretty good, but they're having more trouble with concentration. They can pick out those problem areas and work on very individualized therapy to help those patients in those areas. And there's a lot of tools also online and tools that you can buy and put on your computer at home. So there's lots of ways to approach this, but we want you to know that those resources are available, and we have people that can help and direct you in that direction. And you can also ask your neurologist too. Say, where am I on this cognitive problem? Do I need to have more testing? And if so, what kind of treatment would be helpful for me at this point? Okay. So those are really the big three areas that I think if we focus on those areas, we really do some great things for longevity and for improving quality of life. You could go on the rest of the day about this dementia and cognitive impairment issue, including helping caregivers and family members and all of the issues that come into play. And we just don't have the time this morning to go into all of those details, but this is a conversation I think that's important to have with your doctors and the therapists that are available. I want to now shift to some complications that some of you may not be even aware of that are complications of Parkinson's or the treatments of Parkinson's, that I think if we're at least aware of them, we can all work together to either avoid them or treat them when they come up. So driving is a touchy subject as well. This is probably where I have the most fights in the office. Some men have walked out on me and just walked out of the room and said, "I'm not giving up my driving. You're taking away my independence." And of course, that's not something we're happy about doing. We would love if patients could continue to drive and operate equipment, but there becomes a time when it's just not safe anymore for patients to drive out of their own safety and the safety of the others on the road. And it's sometimes a difficult call for the family members or even the neurologist to say, no more driving. It's hard sometimes for us to decide when that point is appropriate or if it's appropriate. And I think one of the resources we can utilize is the Department of Motor Vehicles. We can ask for a yearly driving exam where an officer or someone at the driving organization will drive with the patient in the car and do a formal driving test to see if they are safe to operate the car. And that way, if you are safe, you now have legal backing to go ahead and continue driving. And that's been one of the challenges, I think, for some of our patients who maybe are pretty good drivers despite having Parkinson's, but if they get into an accident, sometimes they can be accused of wrongdoing just because they have this diagnosis on their chart. But maybe it wasn't their fault to begin with. And so if you have a legal exam that says you are safe to drive, that is a very important support to have. So I would encourage you, if you are still driving, to take a yearly exam and have that evaluated. There are simulators. I showed a picture here on the left. There are some places around the country that have driving simulators where patients can get behind and it tests their reaction time and their ability to make decisions behind the wheel. And that's another way of potentially assessing driving ability. Many of you are not aware of the increased risk of melanoma, unfortunately. When we look at cancers and Parkinson's disease, we find overall that Parkinson's patients have a reduced risk of developing cancer compared to the general population, which is wonderful. But melanoma is the exception to that. Studies have shown that patients have a 4-time increased risk of melanoma just having a diagnosis of Parkinson's compared to the general population. And these are just two pictures that may be hard to see, but that show skin melanoma. And often if you see something on your skin that is changing, if it's changing in color, if it's growing in size, if it has these irregular borders, or maybe multiple different colors within the skin lesion, those are some definite signs to say, I better get this checked out right away. It could be melanoma. But I don't want you to have to make the skin diagnosis of melanoma. I think patients should really go at least on a yearly basis and have a full skin exam done, preferably by a dermatologist who can look you over very carefully. And it's not just sun-exposed areas. These melanomas can show up anywhere on the skin. So it's important to have a trained specialist look over this, I think, on a yearly basis. We have not found any connection with the medications. It just seems to be a risk that comes with Parkinson's itself. So we don't want that to sneak up on us. Impulse control problems, this is something that's really developed in our understanding, but there are still patients that are just not familiar with this idea at all. We have recognized that some of the medications that we use for Parkinson's disease could turn on some unusual behaviors that may not have been there ever before. Patients can get on some of these medications and suddenly they can't stay out of the casino. They are gambling obsessively. And we've had, unfortunately, patients that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in a very short period of time because they would sneak out of the home every night and run down to the casino, and they couldn't stop gambling. I mean, and they knew there was a problem. They just could not stop themselves from what was happening. Excessive shopping, use of other products like cigarettes or alcohol, overeating. There's been reports of excessive fishing. Not real sure if that was really part of this or if the gentleman just liked fishing, but nevertheless, patients can sometimes just start obsessing over something that may not even have a purpose. For instance, a gentleman might go out to the shop and for hours be moving nails or screws from one jar to the next, just for hours. And you look at that and you think, what are you doing? And they just cannot stop from that activity. And that's called punding. So these kind of behaviors can creep up. The Mayo Clinic did a study on this and found that it may be as high as 25% of patients may have some of these behaviors develop during the course of their treatment. So I think if everybody's aware of it and looking out for these problems, you can bring that to the attention of your treating doctor and let them adjust the medications. Often if you just change the dosing or change the medication, this behavior just disappears immediately. So it's very reversible, but if we don't know that it's part of the risk of taking these medications, we can get into trouble. Glaucoma is worth mentioning. There is a rare form of glaucoma that's called narrow angle glaucoma, and that is the only type of glaucoma that could become a problem with some of the medications that we take for Parkinson's. And if you were to develop that problem, you would know about it. Usually patients are running to the emergency room in that situation. It's extreme pain in the eye with inflammation, blurry vision, seeing halos around lights, an extreme sensitivity to light. It's a very abrupt change in your visual field, but I want you to be aware of this because if it's not treated immediately, you could lose vision. It could lead to vision loss if it's not treated properly. And so some of the medications have a very, very small risk of inducing this, so we have to be careful about this. Again, having a yearly eye exam is probably a good idea. They will monitor for glaucoma and take care of all of your vision needs as well. Okay. Most of you are probably taking a medication, carbidopa-levodopa, or Sinemet, which is one of our main medications to treat Parkinson's. And one of the things that can happen over time is we can develop a deficiency in vitamin B6. And so it's now recommended that patients take either a multivitamin or a supplement like this called Fultex that has a combination of B vitamins, folic acid, all in one supplement. It's recommended that we get between 10 to 25 milligrams of vitamin B6 a day. I may not have that on your sheet there, but you might consider that along with the calcium and vitamin D that we talked about. Okay. Bowel obstructions can be another complication that's unpleasant to talk about, but fortunately we're talking about it before lunch. Of course, Parkinson's slows down the digestive system, but also the medications can contribute to this as well. And if patients are not attending to having a regular bowel movement, either with supplements of some sort, stool softeners, or laxatives, or fiber, or exercise, or getting enough hydration, this can be a risky problem to develop and can lead one to the emergency room. So, please talk to your neurologist about this, and sometimes we need referrals to our GI colleagues to help with more advanced treatments to keep our bowel movements regular. This is about dehydration. A lot of patients, and I understand, the issues that come up with urinary control and swallowing, and there's been I think a generalized tendency to not want to take in much fluids during the day when dealing with Parkinson's, and patients can become dehydrated, and they may not have the usual symptom of thirst to signal them that they are getting dehydrated. Let's go to the next. These are some of the symptoms of dehydration that some of Parkinson's patients may experience that could be not well understood. We may get a phone call that, they're not, the patient is confused today. They seem to be acting different than they were last week, or they seem extra fatigued or sleepy today. We haven't changed the medication, but boy, he's just not waking up and not as aware and alert today as he has been. And this doesn't mean that we're developing a dementia or some other problem. It could just be dehydration. I put on your form there that anytime there's a change in mental status, if a patient starts to become disoriented or confused or just acting different, there's a series of tests that we like to do right away to look for reversible causes. We like to look at the blood chemistries, look for infection. Sometimes we get a CAT scan of the brain to look for that bleeding complication that I mentioned. We check some other blood factors, but sometimes the issue is really just dehydration. And so if you see some of these symptoms, kind of look at the intake of fluids a little more carefully. Let's go to the next slide. These are symptoms that would, or signs that would lead one to go to the emergency room right away with dehydration difficulties. So if there's a fever of 103, it may not be just dehydration. It could be something else that needs to be looked into. However, fever is interestingly one of the signs of dehydration in Parkinson's patients. But these are just some other examples of reasons you might seek emergency care right away. Blood pressure is another issue that I think a lot of people are becoming more aware of, and if you've come to our clinic, you get a lot of blood pressure checks, and we do a lot of teaching on this. But I think a lot of people are not aware of the possibility that their blood pressure can drop when they stand up compared to their blood pressure when they're sitting. And this can be a result of Parkinson's, it can be a result of medication side effect, or both. And this can lead someone to feel very weak, very tired. It can lead to a fall or a passing out episode. And it may be overlooked because every time you've had your blood pressure checked in the sitting position, it's always pretty good. And so you think, well, gosh, it can't be my blood pressure, it's always normal. But if you haven't had it checked in the standing position, we could miss this problem that, again, is very treatable. There's a group over here that's bringing out a new medication for this particular problem. But we do have some other treatments as well. So again, the dehydration issue and our blood pressures become sometimes a major problem that we need to treat. And then another issue is leg swelling. There's lots of reasons a leg can swell, of course, but if it's one side, if one leg starts to become swollen, red, irritated, we need to keep in mind the risk of blood clots forming, called deep venous thrombosis. And again, this can be a serious complication or a potentially life-threatening complication. And a lot of the blood clot formation can come from the fact that a lot of patients are not as active as they used to be. They may be sitting more, and the immobility has led to this increased risk, which again is another reason to get into those exercise programs and therapy as much as you can. So in summary, I know I've thrown a lot of information your way this morning, but I just think these are all very important topics to bring to your attention. These are just some recommendations that I'd ask you to consider. We think that you need to continue to work closely with your neurologist or movement disorder specialist, and if the patient may have some symptoms or may sometimes not want to bring symptoms up to our attention, but if there's something going on that the caregivers can bring to our attention, we encourage you to do that, because a lot of the challenges that you may be having may not be comfortable to bring up during the interviews, but we certainly want to know about them and try to help everybody involved as much as possible. Your medical doctor should continue to evaluate you with routine laboratory studies, again looking for things like vitamin D deficiency, making sure you're getting all the regular general health exams. The eye exam and the dermatology exam, I think, are now important for patients to do, at least on a yearly basis. We would like for patients to have good monitoring of their bone health with the DEXA scans, the bone density scans, and the driving exam that we talked about and the cognitive assessments are also available as well. One more slide, I think. Let's go back one more. And then, of course, there's the therapies that we've talked about already that are great resources for us here. So please have a low threshold to consider working with our speech pathology colleagues on speech and swallowing, our therapists, trainers. I think all of those things just take a lot of investment of your energy and time, and I know it's not very easy in many cases to make the arrangements to get to those type of facilities, but it really does pay off. And I think the feedback from our patients has always been, I'm so glad that I did that. I'm glad that I pushed myself to get to the therapist, because it's making a big difference in my quality of life. So with that, I'll end, and thank you for your time and attention this morning. This is not a comprehensive list, but just some recommendations that I have on those handouts. So a lot of those final summaries are on the back side of that handout, if that's helpful for you to take home. I also listed some medications that you might look over and see if perhaps you may be taking one of those medications, and if by some chance you're having trouble with balance or trouble with cognition, it might be worth discussing that with your doctors and see if maybe we need to rethink the use of some of those medications. Sometimes there's no way around it, but it's worth a discussion. So I listed some of those there. It's not a complete list. It's hard to put all the drugs on there, but at least some major groups to consider to review when you have a chance. Okay, thank you.